What if I told you that the woman everyone thinks destroyed Daenerys Targaryen actually saved the world from something far worse? What if her so-called betrayal was actually the most heroic sacrifice in the entire story? And what if everything you think you know about Mirri Maz Duur is completely wrong? Most viewers see her as a vengeful witch who killed Khal Drogo and cursed Daenerys out of spite. But that surface-level understanding misses the most chilling truth hidden in George R.R. Martin's masterpiece. Mirri wasn't just some random healer who turned evil. She was a brilliant strategist who saw a threat so terrifying that she willingly sacrificed everything to stop it. You see, while everyone was focused on the dragons hatching at the end of Season 1, they completely missed what Mirri actually prevented. The show glosses over it, casual viewers never catch it, and even book readers often overlook the devastating implications. But when you piece together the clues scattered throughout the story, a horrifying picture emerges. Mirri Maz Duur didn't just kill one man and one unborn child. She prevented the rise of a conqueror who would have made Aegon the Conqueror look like a peaceful diplomat. She stopped an apocalypse that would have consumed not just Westeros, but every civilization from the Jade Sea to the Sunset Sea. And the price she paid for saving millions of lives was being burned alive while everyone called her a monster. But here's where it gets really twisted. In saving the world from one nightmare, Mirri accidentally created something potentially worse. Her final moments weren't just about dying with dignity. She was staring at Daenerys with absolute terror because she realized what her sacrifice had actually accomplished. The cure had become more dangerous than the disease. The dragons everyone celebrates weren't just magical creatures being reborn. They were weapons of mass destruction that Mirri's own actions made possible. And the woman she thought she was teaching a lesson about the price of power had just learned the most dangerous lesson of all. That death really can pay for life if you're willing to pay the price. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you see not just Mirri Maz Duur, but the entire foundation of Game of Thrones. You'll understand why this seemingly minor character's decisions created ripple effects that are still shaping events in House of the Dragon. And you'll discover the terrifying prophecy that Mirri was desperately trying to prevent, even if it meant becoming the most hated woman in Westeros. By the end of this video, you'll never look at that funeral pyre scene the same way again. Because what you thought was the birth of dragons was actually something much more complex. It was the moment when a healer's desperate gambit to save the world backfired in the most spectacular way possible, the healer's origin. In the shadow of the Dothraki Sea, where peaceful shepherds tend their flocks under the protection of the Great Shepherd, a woman named Mirri Maz Duur was destined to change the course of Westeros forever. But what most viewers miss is that her actions weren't random acts of cruelty. They were calculated moves in a game where the stakes were the fate of entire civilizations. The story begins long before Daenerys Targaryen ever set foot in Essos. In the quiet settlements of Lazar, where the Lazarene people lived simple lives, devoted to healing and worship, Mirri was being shaped into something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Her mother served as a godswife in the temple of the Great Shepherd, passing down ancient knowledge of healing arts that stretched back generations. But here's what the show never fully explained, and what even book readers often overlook. The Lazarene weren't just peaceful sheep herders. They were repositories of some of the oldest medical and magical knowledge in the known world. The Great Shepherd's teachings emphasized that all people were one flock. But this philosophy came with a darker understanding. When wolves threaten the flock, sometimes a shepherd must become something else entirely. Young Mirri absorbed not just healing techniques, but also the weight of protecting her people. The Lazarene settlements were constantly under threat from Dothraki raids, and traditional medicine wasn't enough to save those who were butchered, enslaved, or worse. This is where Mirri's true education began, not in the temples of Lazar, but in recognizing that good intentions meant nothing without power. The pivotal moment came when Mirri made a decision that would echo through the ages. She left Lazar, not just to learn healing, but to acquire weapons, not swords or arrows, knowledge. She traveled to Ashai by the Shadow, one of the most mysterious and dangerous cities in the world, where shadow binders and sorcerers gathered knowledge that civilized people feared to touch. In Ashai, Mirri didn't just study with healers. She learned from mages who understood that life and death were currencies that could be traded. A moon singer of the Jogos Nai taught her birthing songs that could influence what kind of life entered the world. A woman of the Dothraki, ironically, shared secrets of grass and corn and horse magic. Most crucially, a maester from Westeros named Marwyn the Mage opened bodies before her, showing her the secrets that hide beneath the skin. This wasn't medical school. This was war college. Every technique Mirri learned had dual purposes. Birthing songs could bring life or prevent it. Knowledge of anatomy could heal or harm. The magic of grass and corn could nurture crops or poison them. Marwyn's lessons about what lies beneath the skin weren't just about healing. They were about knowing exactly where to cut. When Mirri returned to her village, she wasn't the same woman who had left. She had become something unprecedented. A healer, trained by shadow mages, a protector armed with knowledge that could reshape reality itself. For years, she used this power exactly as her people expected, healing the sick, delivering babies, saving lives. The village prospered under her care, and she gained a reputation that spread beyond Lazar, but Mirri was waiting. She had seen enough of the world to know that the Dothraki threat wasn't diminishing, it was growing. The Khalasars were becoming larger, more organized, more destructive. Traditional Lazarine pacifism wouldn't protect anyone when the Horse Lords came with fire and sword. She needed a plan that would strike at the heart of Dothraki power. The tragedy is that Mirri's preparations were working. Her village was thriving, her people were healthy, and she had developed the skills needed to potentially save them all. But she was always racing against time, and time ran out before she could implement her larger strategy. When Khal Drogo's Khalasar swept down on her village after their victory over Khal Ogo, they weren't just raiding for slaves and plunder. They were destroying the last hope the Lazarine had of developing an effective defense against Dothraki expansion. What happened next wasn't just a tragedy. It was the moment when a healer decided to become something else entirely. The destruction was absolute. Every man in the village was killed, their sheep slaughtered, crops burned, buildings destroyed. The survivors, mostly women and children, faced a fate worse than death. But as Mirri watched her life's work burning around her, something crystallized in her mind. The Dothraki had just made a fatal mistake. They had left alive the one person capable of striking back at them in ways they couldn't imagine. As we'll see in the next part, Mirri's encounter with Daenerys Targaryen wasn't a coincidence. It was an opportunity she had been preparing for her entire life. The calculated revenge. When Daenerys Targaryen rode into the ruins of Mirri's village, she thought she was witnessing random Dothraki brutality. What she actually stumbled into was the beginning of the most consequential magical working in the history of Westeros. And Mirri had been planning something like this for years. The scene was devastating. Mothers stumbled through the wreckage with blank faces, pulling crying children behind them. The few surviving men were cripples, cowards, and grandfathers. Anyone too weak to fight had been spared only to watch their world burn. Dothraki raiders made sport of hunting down fleeing children, while others casually discussed where to sell their new slaves for the best prices. But Mirri wasn't just another victim. When she emerged from the crowd of captive women, everything about her was different. She wore fine clothes despite the destruction, spoke fluent Dothraki and common tongue, in addition to her native language, and carried herself with an authority that even the Horse Lords noticed. This wasn't a broken woman. This was a predator who had just found the perfect hunting ground. Daenerys, to her credit, tried to stop the worst of the brutality. She claimed the women and girls as her own slaves, which prevented immediate assault but also put them under her protection. This is where most people misunderstand what happened next. They see Mirri offering to heal Khal Drogo's wound as gratitude or medical duty. But look deeper at the timing and context. Mirri only spoke up after she heard the Dothraki talking about Daenerys' unborn child, specifically their belief that he would be the stallion who mounts the world. This wasn't a random prophecy to Mirri. As a well-traveled woman who had studied in Asshai and learned from various cultures, she knew exactly what the stallion prophecy meant for people like the Lazarene. The stallion who mounts the world wasn't just a Dothraki messiah. He was a promised conqueror who would unite all Khalasars into a single army and ride to the ends of the earth. Every people of the world would become his herd. For the Lazarene, who had just experienced what a single Khalasar could do, this prophecy represented the end of everything they held dear. So when Mirri offered to heal Drogo's infected wound, she wasn't trying to save him. She was positioning herself for something much more complex. The healing poultice she applied would probably have worked if Drogo had followed her instructions. But she knew the Dothraki well enough to predict that he wouldn't. Their culture despised weakness, and carefully tending a wound was seen as cowardice. She was counting on Drogo's pride to sabotage his own treatment. The brilliant cruelty of Mirri's plan becomes clear when you realize she was manipulating multiple people simultaneously. She gained Daenerys' trust by appearing to help, knowing that this trust would eventually give her access to something far more valuable than one Khal's life, the prophesied child who could destroy entire civilizations. When Drogo's condition worsened and Daenerys begged Mirri to save him with blood magic, Mirri had achieved exactly what she wanted. She had maneuvered a desperate Daenerys into asking for the very working that would allow her to eliminate the stallion threat forever. The ritual she performed wasn't a healing, it was an execution disguised as salvation. Only death can pay for life, Mirri told Daenerys, and she meant it literally. She wasn't trying to save Drogo, she was orchestrating his destruction and that of his unborn heir. The magic worked exactly as intended. Drogo's horse died, providing the death needed for the working, but instead of restoring the Khal to health, it left him as a hollow shell. Alive but empty, capable of nothing more than basic bodily functions. More importantly, the ritual killed Rhaego, Daenerys' unborn son, who was prophesied to be the stallion who mounts the world. This wasn't collateral damage, it was the entire point. Mirri had successfully eliminated the greatest threat to peaceful peoples across Essos, and she did it by convincing the child's own mother to participate in the working. The curse Mirri delivered afterward wasn't random cruelty. It was a carefully crafted psychological weapon designed to ensure Daenerys never had another child who could fulfill the prophecy. Oh, when the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, when the seas go dry and mountains blow in the wind like leaves. Poetic language that meant never, but with the added barb that Daenerys would never bear a living child again. But Mirri made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed that eliminating the stallion threat would make the world safer for her people. She didn't anticipate that Daenerys would learn the wrong lesson from their encounter. Not that magic was dangerous and unpredictable, but that it was powerful and achievable. The phrase, "only death can pay for life," wasn't meant as instruction. It was meant as warning. But Daenerys heard it as a formula. When Mirri realized that Daenerys was planning to use her death to hatch dragon eggs, her final expression wasn't fear for herself. It was terror at what she had unleashed. She had prevented one prophesied conqueror only to enable something potentially worse. In the final part, we'll explore how Mirri's actions didn't just change individual lives. They altered the entire trajectory of Westerosi and Essosi history in ways that are still reverberating through House of the Dragon. The unintended consequences. The moment Mirri Maz Duur died in Drogo's funeral pyre, she achieved everything she had planned for and unleashed consequences that would have horrified her. Her death didn't just pay for dragon life as Daenerys intended. It fundamentally altered the balance of power across two continents and set in motion events that would reshape the world for generations. Let's start with what Mirri successfully prevented. By killing Rhaego and rendering Drogo catatonic, she eliminated the most immediate threat to peaceful civilizations across Essos. A united Dothraki nation, under the stallion who mounts the world, would have been unstoppable with medieval military technology. The devastation that one Khalasar inflicted on Mirri's village would have been repeated across every settlement from the Jade Sea to the Sunset Sea. More specifically, Mirri prevented a Dothraki invasion of Westeros that would have come at the worst possible time. Drogo had already committed to crossing the Narrow Sea to win the Iron Throne for his beloved Khaleesi. If Mirri hadn't intervened, 100,000 Dothraki screamers would have landed in Westeros right in the middle of the War of the Five Kings, when the realm was already torn apart by internal conflict. Think about the timing. The great houses were exhausted from fighting each other, their armies depleted, their resources strained. A Dothraki horde arriving at that moment wouldn't have faced organized resistance. They would have found scattered, weakened forces incapable of uniting against an external threat. The Seven Kingdoms would have been overrun within months, and instead of the relatively controlled chaos of civil war, Westeros would have experienced the total destruction that characterized Dothraki conquests. But Mirri's intervention created different problems, arguably worse ones. By teaching Daenerys that only death can pay for life, she provided the key insight that made hatching dragons possible. The dragons that emerged from Drogo's pyre weren't just magical creatures. They were weapons of mass destruction that no existing military technology could counter. The irony is devastating. Mirri eliminated one prophesied conqueror only to enable a different kind of conquest entirely. Instead of preventing Westerosi invasion, she simply changed its nature. Rather than facing a mortal army that could be defeated through conventional warfare, Westeros would eventually face an enemy with nuclear-equivalent firepower that could burn entire cities in minutes. The dragons also fundamentally altered the political landscape of Essos in ways Mirri never intended. Without them, Daenerys would have been just another exiled Targaryen claimant with no realistic path to power. The dragons transformed her from a teenage refugee into the most powerful individual in the known world almost overnight. The slave cities of Slavers Bay, which had operated unchanged for thousands of years, were conquered and their entire economic system overthrown. This created massive instability across Essos that affected millions of people. The collapse of the slave trade didn't just free those in bondage, it destabilized entire regions whose economies depended on that trade. Cities that had never known war found themselves fighting for survival. Populations that had been stable for centuries were suddenly in motion, creating refugee crises and resource conflicts that spread far beyond anything Daenerys directly controlled. But perhaps most troubling is how Mirri's actions affected the balance between ice and fire that maintains stability in this world. The dragon's return coincided with increasing White Walker activity beyond the Wall. Whether this was coincidence or causation remains unclear, but the timing suggests that magical forces maintain equilibrium and dramatic increases in fire magic may trigger corresponding increases in ice magic. From this perspective, Mirri didn't just prevent one conquest. She may have triggered the conditions for an apocalyptic war between ice and fire that threatened all human civilization. The very magic she used to eliminate regional threats may have escalated to existential ones. There's also the question of prophecy itself. Mirri assumed that eliminating Rhaego would end the stallion who mounts the world threat permanently. But prophecies in this world are notoriously difficult to interpret and often fulfill themselves in unexpected ways. What if the true stallion wasn't meant to be Daenerys' son, but one of her dragons? Drogon, in particular, fits the description remarkably well. He unites disparate forces under Daenerys' banner and carries her across vast distances to conquer new territories. If this interpretation is correct, then Mirri's efforts to prevent the prophecy actually caused its fulfillment in a different form. She tried to eliminate a human conqueror and instead enabled a draconic one. The stallion who mounts the world may not be riding a horse, but soaring through the sky on wings of fire. Looking at the broader historical impact, Mirri's choices demonstrate how individual actions can have consequences far beyond their intended scope. She was a local healer, trying to protect her people from regional threats, but her methods unleashed forces that affected global politics and may have contributed to supernatural threats that endangered all humanity. This raises profound questions about the ethics of magical intervention. Mirri had legitimate grievances and used her knowledge to address genuine threats, but the tools she employed, blood magic, death magic, prophetic manipulation, were inherently unpredictable and potentially catastrophic in their consequences. Her story serves as a warning about how dangerous knowledge can be, even when used with good intentions. The tragedy of Mirri Maz Duur isn't just that she suffered and died, it's that her suffering led to choices that may have made the world more dangerous rather than safer. Her final expression of fear as Daenerys prepared the funeral pyre suggests she understood this. She had succeeded in her immediate goals, but realized too late that success and victory are not the same thing. In trying to save her people from one form of destruction, she may have enabled others that were far worse. Her story reminds us that in the world of ice and fire, even the most justified actions can have consequences that echo across centuries, and sometimes the cure proves more dangerous than the disease.